The faces of Wang Chong's subordinates went stiff. What they had feared had come to pass. As their lord's eyes were as sharp as ever, they couldn't hide anything from him. "Relax. I've already prepared myself," Wang Chong calmly said. After all that he had experienced, he could accept even the worst news. "Your Highness?" Sukai swallowed, lowered his head, and finally began to cautiously report another matter. "While you were gone, Prime Minister Li Linfu managed to pass a proposal through the court completely disbanding the prefectural armies. By now, the prefectural armies are almost all dissolved. In addition, with Li Juanxian's vigorous backing, a large number of who have been allowed into the capital and the other provinces, much more than previously allowed. There are 50,000 in the capital alone. We've also discovered quite a few foreign spies within these who, but Li Juanxian has completely suppressed this news," Xianxia added. Bang! Wang Chong's body trembled in shock. Even though he had prepared himself to hear about how the Confucian sect had seized the month, he had been gone to magnify its victory and suppress the Bureau of Military Personnel. The news that the prefectural armies had been disbanded still left a nasty scowl on his face. The prefectural armies were the foundation of the country, a reserve of soldiers. Without the prefectural armies, a major incident would result in unimaginable consequences. Li Juanxian. Wang Chong clenched his fists as this name passed through his mind. "Your Highness?" His subordinates worriedly looked across the desk at Wang Chong, but none of them dared to say a word. The mood became almost suffocating. After a seemingly interminable second, Wang Chong finally spoke. "I understand." Wang Chong waved his hand and took in a deep breath. Although there was still some turmoil in his voice, he was not as agitated as everyone had expected. "We'll take back everything we've lost one by one. Temporary setbacks are insignificant. I've come back so that I can correct all the errors and put them back on the right track," Wang Chong sternly said. "Phew!" Wang Chong's calm voice caused everyone to breathe a sigh of relief. Amidst their relief, they also felt excitement and anticipation. This was the first time they had encountered such a predicament, but just like in the southwest and at Talas, they all maintained an absolute conviction and trust in their young master. Around an hour later, the meeting was over and they left the study on Wang Chong's orders. Once they were gone, Wang Chong turned to Old Eagle. "Old Eagle, speak. What has happened with the fifth prince?" It was only now that Wang Chong chose to broach this matter. At the same time, he removed the letter that Old Eagle had sent him from his sleeve, slowly opening it on the table. The letter he had received in the northwest had said nothing regarding the capital or the court. It had been about the fifth prince. Based on the information levels the two of them had previously agreed on, the letter Old Eagle had sent was a matter of absolute urgency. If it weren't serious, Old Eagle would have never sent it using the method he had. "Lord Marquis, the story is rather long. Not long ago, when I was still observing Yusang and the Turks while also managing the communications between the capital and the borders, the fifth prince's personal eunuch, Li Jingzhong, came to me. With a worried face, he said that he had an extremely important matter to discuss with your Highness, a matter which the fifth prince's life hinged on. Now that no one else was present, Old Eagle's face turned grave as he began to recount the events of that time. I found it rather strange. With your Highness's help, the fifth prince should have gained a firm footing in the capital. Moreover, Su Kai is the one responsible for these matters, so there was no reason for Li Jingzhong to find me. He said that the matter was extremely urgent and that he couldn't even get close to the Wang family residence. Nor was he able to. There was a deep apprehension in his tone. Before leaving, he gave your subordinate a letter. This is the letter. As Old Eagle spoke, he took the letter from his sleeve and offered it with both hands. Wang Chong said nothing as he opened the letter and began to read through it. Old Eagle didn't dare to say a word for fear of interrupting Wang Chong. After a long while, Wang Chong finally put down the letter, and his brow began to crease. Li Jingzhong's letter was faltering and vague, as if he was worried that the letter might fall into the wrong hands. Reading the letter had only added to Wang Chong's questions. I understand. Regaining his composure, Wang Chong waved his hand and dismissed Old Eagle. Once he was alone, Wang Chong placed a hand on his brow and began to think. When he was receiving Old Eagle's letter back in the northwest, he had heard the Stone of Destiny speak. Warning! User's mission plan of the True Dragon is under grave threat and is on the verge of failure. Once target Li Heng dies, user will be deducted 300,000 points of destiny energy. Notice, as Li Heng is an important individual for this world, his death will have severe consequences that could lead the world's history down an unpredictable path, producing many unknown variables. Note, for mission failure, user will be deducted an additional 1 million points of destiny energy. What is going on here? Wang Chong's brow furrowed deeper and deeper. He had concluded that after the last incident in the palace, Li Heng should have been able to slowly establish his own prestige and recruit his own comrades that could help him plan and strategize. The fifth prince was maturing by the day, and not even the first prince could deal with him that easily. Moreover, the status of prince was extremely important. The third prince Li Ju, for his crimes of framing Li Heng and deceiving the sovereign, had only been jailed in the imperial prison. Why had the Stone of Destiny mentioned that Li Heng would die? This shouldn't be. Wang Chong muttered to himself as he searched through his memories. Based on what he knew, nothing important was happening around this time that could threaten Li Heng. Shaking himself from his stupor, he cast his eyes on the envelope the letter had come in. Thrusting his fingers inside, he quickly extracted a small token. The sight of this small token made Wang Chong's eyes slowly clear up. Time slowly passed, and without much fanfare, a day had passed since Wang Chong's return to the capital. In the western part of the capital, a new restaurant had been opened on Kuei Dragon Street, lavishly decorated and painted. The words Morning Song Pavilion had been written on its signboard. Morning Song Pavilion was one of the most popular restaurants on Kuei Dragon Street, with merchants, peddlers, and commoners of all trades and professions going in and out. Amongst the gourmets of the capital, its reputation was even beginning to catch up to vast Crane Pavilion. Creak! The door of a carriage parked outside the pavilion slowly opened, allowing a slender figure to walk out. This is the place? Wang Chong looked up at Morning Song Pavilion. Wang Chong had slightly altered his appearance. Although he was no master of this art with his cultivation, he could control the muscles and bones of his face to change his external features. Moreover, there were many carriages outside Morning Song Pavilion, so unless someone was watching out for him in particular, they wouldn't pick him out from the crowd. Wang Chong quickly went inside. Inside Morning Song Pavilion, a waiter lazily leaned against the counter. Morning Song Pavilion was so popular that the other waiters were rushing up to passionately greet guests, so busy that they had no free time, but this waiter appeared completely at ease. Wang Chong walked over and merely flashed the small token in his hand. Buzz! The red token in Wang Chong's hand caused the lazy waiter to tremble, his eyes flying open. Guest, please, come inside. The waiter shook his sleeves and enthusiastically led the way. Passing through the entire restaurant, Wang Chong was led toward a hidden passage going underground. Your Highness, thank you for the trouble. My lord is inside and would like to treat you to a meal. Now that no one was around, the waiter deferentially bowed. Wang Chong grunted and gave a slight nod. Then he pushed the door and went in. The room was quiet, a fact which Wang Chong did not find surprising at all. Li Jingzhong, come out, Wang Chong said without turning his head. It was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. A few moments later, with a dry cough and the jangling of a concealed curtain, Li Jingzhong walked out, an awkward expression on his face. Wang Chong, it's me, the man softly said. But this wasn't Li Jingzhong's voice. Wang Chong made out this man's features in the dim light and was struck dumb. Your Highness! Wang Chong's body trembled in surprise. He had come to Morning Song Pavilion on Li Jingzhong's request, under the impression that he was going to see the number one treacherous eunuch of the Great Tang. He had never imagined that the one waiting in this secret room was not Li Jingzhong, but the progeny of the Son of Heaven, the revered fifth prince, Li Heng. Li Heng was not wearing the dragon robe of a prince, but the indigo robes of a eunuch. If one didn't look carefully, one really might mistake him for Li Jingzhong. But upon close inspection, one would still note that deep concern and unease in Li Heng's eyes. "Your Highness, why are you here?" And Wang Chong froze as he glanced at the eunuch robes Li Heng was wearing. Just what in the world had happened in the imperial palace? The son of a dragon had put on the robes of a fish, putting on a disguise to meet him in this secretive underground room. The situation was clearly grim. And even more strangely, despite the fifth prince's honored status, he did not have a single companion. "Uncle Jing is outside drawing attention for me. Too many people in the capital are watching him right now," Li Heng sternly said. Wang Chong's eyebrow instinctively rose. Li Jingzhong had been serving Li Heng for a very long time now. What did Li Heng mean by outside drawing attention? Were so many people watching Li Jingzhong now? Wang Chong was befuddled. "Wang Chong, you must think of a way to help me," Li Heng anxiously said. "Your Highness, don't panic. I will definitely help you, but you first have to tell me what happened," Wang Chong sternly said, getting more confused by the second. Fifth Prince Li Heng was not the sort of person who couldn't keep his composure, or else he wouldn't have been able to emerge unscathed from that court session in front of the sage emperor. Even though he had the advice from Wang Chong, he still needed to possess his own extraordinary personality and ability. But Li Heng gave off a different feeling now. Wang Chong, first imperial brother, dominates the imperial court. Now that he's serving as the regent for imperial father, his authority reaches the heavens, and even a single step forward is difficult for me within the palace. Li Heng took in a deep breath and tried to calm himself down. "Buzz!" Wang Chong instantly grimaced. He knew that Li Heng wouldn't come to find him unless he was in deep trouble, but he had never imagined that he had already been forced into this stage. The first prince and the fifth prince had not just been fighting for 1 or 2 days, but the first prince was always cautious, composed, and extremely restrained. Thus, even after so many years of forming his own faction and ordering shameful deeds, the first prince had never left behind a clue. His status as the heir apparent was as sturdy as Mount Tai. Even Wang Chong felt a tinge of admiration. The first prince had cultivated the principle of looking out for his own hide to the apex, and what the fifth prince described was a complete mismatch for his customary cautious style. "Your Highness has been gone for more than a month, so there are some things that you don't know. The Confucian sect and Li Junxian have taken over the imperial court, while first imperial brother has taken complete control over the imperial palace. In this time, first imperial brother has closed ranks and begun to pressure me. In the span of a month, first imperial brother found excuses to transfer my advisors to the frontier, and anyone who defied him was imprisoned for the crime of disrespect. And some of my important advisors were intercepted and killed on their way to the border. The first prince said that they were killed by bandits, but the roads to the west were cleared of bandits by your Highness long ago, and they had many powerful experts guarding them, quite a few at the imperial martial realm. When did the bandits of the frontier become so formidable that they could even kill imperial martial realm guards? Does first imperial brother really think I'm a 3-year-old child? He's gone too far." The fifth prince was so enraged that his lips were trembling. "What?" Wang Chong trembled in shock. How could this have happened? Wang Chong's mind was reeling from the fifth prince's words. He had never imagined that such a thing could happen. Seeing the fifth prince's enraged and grief-stricken appearance, Wang Chong suddenly understood why Li Heng had appeared alone and without any companions. Li Heng had been an underdog almost his entire life. On his first meeting with Wang Chong, he had even been compelled to hide in Deflecting Blade Manor. But from his place of absolute submission and disregard, he had slowly begun to gather his own crew. All of this had come with great difficulty for the fifth prince, so he had cherished them deeply. But with these acts, the first prince had dealt him a mortal blow. That's not all. First imperial brother has become completely unrestrained. In the span of 1 month, there have been 5 attempts on my life within the imperial palace. Without Uncle Jing's vigilance and instinct, I might not have been able to see your Highness. The fifth prince's face was pale and his eyes tinged with fear and anger. He had encountered all sorts of setbacks, but never before had he felt so helpless. Assassinations? Wang Chong was even more stunned than Li Heng by this news. Assassinating a prince, particularly within the grounds of the imperial palace, was no small affair. Once the matter was investigated, it was bound to stir up a great storm. Even if the first prince was the heir apparent, he was going too far. Wang Chong's first instinct was to kick up a fuss over this matter, perhaps even use it to bring down the first prince. But after his initial rage, Wang Chong sensed that something was strange. The first prince has always been a shrewd and cautious person. Why has he suddenly become so impatient? This doesn't match his style. With this thought, Wang Chong calmed back down. His intuition told him that something was wrong, that there might be someone else plotting behind the scenes. But Wang Chong quickly understood. Even if the other princes wanted to deal with the fifth prince, they wouldn't be so obvious about it, especially not when the first prince was the regent. This would be spitting on the first prince's authority and would be an extraordinarily foolish act. None of the princes of the great Tang imperial household were that stupid. Wang Chong fell into silence. This isn't my only concern. The fifth prince had no idea what Wang Chong was thinking. After finally getting a meeting with Wang Chong, Li Heng felt like he finally had a firm footing. He began to explain all the dangers and setbacks he had experienced over the last month. Although the palace is dangerous, as long as I'm cautious, First Imperial Brother would never be so brash as to attack me in my residence. My greatest concern is Imperial Father. Buzz. Wang Chong felt like he had been struck by a bolt of lightning and instantly stared at Li Heng. Wang Chong paled as he shouted, "What happened to the sage emperor? This?" Li Heng hesitantly looked around, a deep apprehension on his mind, but he still voiced his concerns. First Imperial Brother might be the regent, but the true decision-maker has always been Imperial Father. After all that happened in the palace, my first thought was to find Imperial Father and seek justice. As long as Imperial Father gives the word, even First Imperial Brother will have to show some restraint. But when I went to find Imperial Father, I wasn't even allowed to approach. All the people around Imperial Father's residence have changed. I didn't even recognize any of the bodyguards. Not even princes were allowed to get close. I thought that this was First Imperial Brother's doing to counter me, but I realized later on that this wasn't the case. It wasn't just me. Not even the Prime Minister or Grand Tutor have been able to get an audience with Imperial Father for some time. All the memorials seeking an audience have been returned. Wang Chong, you know how much Imperial Father respects the Grand Tutor. He studied from the Grand Tutor as a youth, but now not even the Grand Tutor can get an audience with Imperial Father, let alone anyone else. Li Heng spoke in a fast and urgent tone, his chest heaving in agitation. Meanwhile, Wang Chong's face had twisted into a nasty grimace. "Your Highness, what is it that you want to say?" Wang Chong loudly interrupted. Li Heng was caught off guard, not understanding what was meant, but seeing Wang Chong's grim expression, he froze. Li Heng was no fool, as no fool could have lived up to this point. Large-scale intrigue in the palace, attempted assassination of a prince, speaking on behalf of the sovereign, cutting him off from his ministers. One or two were nothing special, but all of them linked together meant something entirely different. Li Heng might not have realized yet, but everything he had mentioned pointed toward that greatest taboo of successive dynasties, that which all great clans and nobles feared, even members of the imperial household, the crime of plotting rebellion. In the various dynasties, not even the war of the princes or factional strife could cause as much fear as the words, plotting rebellion. These words were often followed by large-scale massacres and bloodshed. Along with the crime of plotting rebellion came a mindset of everyone is guilty, and the guilty are harshly punished. Even if the innocent had to be killed, no one could be allowed to escape. The crime of plotting rebellion would be accompanied by the deaths of thousands, perhaps even tens of thousands. Countless families would be broken apart, and not even members of the imperial household could escape death. It was said that the walls have ears, and there were some things that one could not just casually talk about, not even in this underground room of Morning Song Pavilion. If someone was listening in and used this information, no explanation in the world could save him and the fifth prince. I misspoke. Nothing of the sort happened. Nothing. I was just randomly speculating. Li Heng paled, and deep fear appeared in his eyes. As a child, He had studied the admonitions of history and the mindset of a sovereign, so he was even more afraid than Wang Chong. Not even he would believe that the first prince wanted to rebel, let alone anyone else. Still, one could not speak with a loose tongue. But I still feel that the mood in the palace is strange, extremely strange. Li Heng's lips were trembling, his entire body oozing unease. Wang Chong, you have to believe me. There's something different this time. You have to help me. Li Heng raised his head to Wang Chong with eyes brimming with hope. Whenever he was in grave danger, Wang Chong would always make a timely appearance to solve his problems. It seemed like there was no problem in the world that he couldn't solve. Thus, the moment Li Heng ran into trouble, he immediately thought about Wang Chong. He had nothing but trust and respect for Wang Chong. The room was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Wang Chong was silent, a pensive look in his eyes. He did not doubt Li Heng's words, but he needed to think about this matter carefully. Too many things made no sense. There's no reason for it. Based on my memories, this should be a period of comparative peace and quiet, with no major incidents. Moreover, since the first prince has been made regent, if all goes as expected, he should be the next sovereign. There's no reason for him to do all of this, acting so openly and leaving behind so many clues. That doesn't match with his personality. Wang Chong's brows locked together in confusion. Far too much had happened while he had been gone. He had originally believed that he only had to deal with the powerful Li Junxian and the Confucian sect backing him. But to his surprise, he now had to deal with the first prince. And though Li Heng said that he was sure that the first prince had done all this, there was still no firm evidence that could link it all to the first prince, Li Ying. Thus, even if Li Heng reported this matter to the imperial court, it would be useless. Moreover, not even Li Heng believed that the first prince had placed the sage emperor under house arrest and was plotting rebellion, so why would anyone else? There was simply no reason for him to do it. It's not right. Suddenly, Wang Chong remembered something, a matter that he had almost forgotten, a major incident that had almost completely altered the Great Tang's political scene. It wasn't that Li Ying was disinclined to plot rebellion. On the contrary, he was more ambitious than anyone else. But his composure and shrewdness had concealed this ambition. Thus, others felt that even if he had this ambition, he would never carry it out. This could be seen from both Wang Chong's and Li Heng's reactions. But in reality, such an incident really had taken place in history. The rebellion of the three princes. Near the end of the sage emperor's reign, when the Wang clan had already fallen, the fleeing Wang Chong had heard of an earth-shaking incident. First Prince Li Ying, second Prince Li Yao, and third Prince Li Ju had joined together and rebelled. Taking advantage of a time when the sage emperor's condition was declining from his failure to reach the divine martial realm, they instigated a coup in an attempt to replace the sage emperor one. This rebellion had left the imperial palace flowing with blood and countless ministers dead. After the coup was over, almost 80% of the court had been wiped out. This was the last major incident in the end days of the Great Tang. Although the losses in this incident were far smaller than those from the war in the southwest and the Battle of Talas, the effects far surpassed those of any war. The strength of the entire country was rapidly expended in this coup. The deaths of countless civil and military officials had ripple effects on innumerable great clans. The Great Tang had already been weak and feeble from the two major defeats, and the rebellion of the three princes finally managed to hollow out this colossus. After the rebellion, the court no longer had anyone to guide it, allowing Kong Yaluishan to jump in and deliver the fatal blow to a once dazzling empire. When Wang Chong became Grand Marshal, he inherited a tattered and devastated mess. Even though he tried his best, he could not prevent the sun from eventually setting. But Wang Chong recalled that there was still an extremely long time until this incident occurred. Thus, Wang Chong had not even considered the possibility when Li Heng began to bring up all these incidents. Could it be that my changing of this world's history has caused the rebellion of the three princes to be moved up? Wang Chong's face slowly turned grave. At its most prosperous, the capital had been home to at least 100,000 great clans, but the rebellion had swept up almost all of them. Li Ying had used various threats and promises to force these great clans into joining, and after the incident, fewer than 1 out of 10 great clans had survived. One could easily imagine the shock this would have on the country. The 100,000 great clans didn't just represent themselves. They represented the strength of the country as a whole. Back then, he hadn't cared. After all, he could hardly keep his own stomach full, so he had little ability to care about any of these things. But now, more than half of the great clans in the capital were tied up with him, and these great clans had rendered great service for the Great Tang in the War of the Southwest and the Battle of Talas. Wang Chong could not ignore their plight. No matter what, he couldn't let them end up this way. More importantly, Wang Chong could not permit the rebellion of the three princes to take place again, wasting the bit of energy he had managed to gather up for the country. But if it really is that, then this is no small matter. I'll have to think about this matter much more carefully, Wang Chong quietly said to himself. History had changed and the times had changed, and the Great Tang was at a different level of power. There was no guarantee that the rebellion of the three princes would enact itself in exactly the same fashion. His past experiences would be of no help here. Moreover, unlike the War of the Southwest and the Battle of Talas, where he had all sorts of information regarding those two wars, the rebellion of the three princes was a matter of internal strife within the imperial household. Many matters had been concealed from outsiders. No one except those involved knew the exact details, and when Li Heng assumed the throne, he placed a taboo on the incident and sealed the records. In addition, most of the participants had been massacred. All this meant that little was known of this extremely influential event other than its name. This was also partially why Wang Chong had not initially thought about this incident. And what also made Wang Chong hesitant was that the rebellion of the three princes was not a conflict where the weapons were out in the weapon and the fires of war thickly burned. Many of the dangers were in places one couldn't see. Contests of intelligence, shrewdness, and schemes were always more dangerous than contests of the very visible swords and sabers. Without firm evidence and without knowledge of any specific time or place, reckless action would not solve any problems and might end up getting him accused of some crime. At that time, it wouldn't just be Wang Chong, but the entire Wang clan and everyone related to it that would join him in death. The enormity of the affair meant that Wang Chong had to move cautiously. "Your Highness, did you think of something?" Li Heng had been staring at Wang Chong this entire time. "It's nothing. Leave this matter to me. I will think of a way to deal with it." Wang Chong quickly came back to his senses. "In addition, you don't have enough people at your side and might get into danger at any time. I will send a few people to your side. They are skilled in medicinal arts and are also powerful martial artists. Take them into your palace as guards. They should be enough to keep you safe for now." Wang Chong wasn't referring to guards of the Wang clan, but to martial artists that he had earlier recruited from the martial arts world. In his Northwest adventure, Wang Chong had not just seen the Origin Immortal Lord and obtained the Origin Immortal Art. He had also gained many followers in the martial arts world. Although not many people in the martial arts world had answered his call, he still had quite a few followers. Li Heng firmly nodded, his mind calming down. Since Wang Chong had said that he would intervene, Li Heng was no longer worried about any danger to himself. "The rules of the palace are strict and First Imperial Brother might send someone to watch me at any time. I have to go back soon," Li Heng suddenly said. As Wang Chong was leaving Morning Song Pavilion, in the dazzling Imperial Palace of the Great Tang, the beating heart of political power, the strumming of zither rose from a dazzling golden hall. Written in gold on the black signboard were several dazzling words. "The Pavilion of Petal and Sepal." The buildings of the palace were usually called palaces, such as the Taiha Palace, Taiji Palace, Xingqing Palace. Only this place was called a pavilion. This was a place where the Great Tang Empire feasted foreign emissaries and honored guests. The Great Tang had been established for several hundred years, but the Sage Emperor had been the most expansionist of all its sovereigns, expanding the borders to an unprecedented size. After subjugating the surrounding countries and gaining their fealty, he erected the Pavilion of Petal and Sepal. At this time, the Pavilion of Petal and Sepal was awash with music and joyous feasting. "Come, a toast! To the first prince!" Within the pavilion, palace maids stood in attendance while bells melodiously rang. First Prince Li Ying stood on a raised platform, his cup raised. A moment later, amidst a chorus of thickly accented Tang, hawk-nosed and deep-eyed who with thick beards stood up and raised their cups to the first prince. The guests at this banquet were emissaries from various countries, as well as princes from the Eastern and Western Turks, the Western regions, Arabia, Charax-Spazinu, and even Yusang and Mengshizhao. The status of the guests made this a state banquet. But while there were maids serving wine and dancing girls, there were no ministers of state. Moreover, the gates were firmly shut, with not even a recording eunuch present. Moreover, a prince of the Great Tang was not meant to visit places like the pavilion of Petal and Sepal. Even as a regent, he should have had ministers around him. All this was in defiance of protocol. This made this a private banquet, not a state banquet. Come, let us give a toast to the future son of heaven of the Great Tang. That's right. His Highness the Regent is benevolent and righteous. In the future, our countries will definitely be able to coexist and prosper. All the foreign dignitaries were calling out in rough Tang language, and their faces were flushed with intoxication. Everyone is too polite. This prince is merely a temporary regent. Without imperial father's approval, this prince cannot be considered the heir apparent yet. The first prince placed one hand behind his back while the other raised a cup to the royalty and emissaries down below. For the first prince to inherit the throne is only right and proper. If anyone dares to oppose the first prince, I, Wanyan Meiwe, will be the first to challenge them. Our Arabia is willing to be the first to support the first prince. As long as the first prince is here, the Western Turks will never go to war with the Great Tang. The riotous crowd, their faces red, called out their praises for the first prince, to which the first prince slightly raised his head and smiled. Spoken words could not be trusted, and despite what these foreign dignitaries said, there was no telling what they were really thinking. But sincere or not, this praise was enough for Liang. Flap, flap. A golden eagle suddenly flew in through the skylight in the ceiling. An armored golden guard with a stern expression glanced at the bird, paled, and quickly strode over to the first prince. Your Highness, there's a problem, the golden guard softly whispered. The first prince also seemed to grimace for a moment as he looked at the golden guard, but a moment later, he had regained his confident composure. It was so fast that one would feel like it had all been an illusion. Guests, please enjoy yourselves. I still have matters to attend to and must leave first. The first prince waved his hand and then cast a glance at a silver-haired eunuch at his side. The eunuch immediately understood and began to confidently walk forward. Once he was out of the pavilion of Petal and Sepal, the first prince's face turned dark. What's going on? The mood in this room was completely different from the mood in the pavilion. The king of foreign lands, who had been missing for more than a month, had suddenly reappeared and returned to the capital, exactly when the first prince wanted to see him the least. We don't know the exact details, but it's confirmed that the king of foreign lands has returned. Moreover, after his return, the gates of the Wang family residence have been under heavy guard, and not even the old grannies who go out to buy food have come out. Our men haven't been able to gather very much information. The golden guard lowered his head, his expression extremely respectful. Nothing but trash. The first prince stared at the golden guard, his expression cold and sinister, but the golden guard did not dare to retort, only pressing his head lower. There was no need to explain what sort of person the king of foreign lands was. The capital with him present and the capital without him were two completely different places. This man was a core member of the army. One could see his influence merely from how his absence of a little more than a month had allowed the first prince and Li Junxian to take over the court and push out the pro-war faction. But if Wang Chong were to appear at this time and issue a rallying cry, quite a few people would answer the call. All this would create a massive headache for the first prince. In this matter, the guard had definitely failed at his duty. The first prince ignored the man, and while he tried his best to keep a calm expression on his face, a hint of annoyance flashed in his eyes. That man's ability, intelligence, and military strategies were 1 in a million, and if there had been a possibility, the first prince would have recruited him for his own side. Alas, that man was determined to be his foe. It was one thing to not help him, but he had also chosen to aid the fifth prince, Li Hong, and become his direct foe. There was nothing left to talk about between them. The first prince rubbed his forehead and suddenly asked, "Have you investigated his whereabouts?" "No, the Wang clan still hasn't made an announcement. And the king of foreign lands. Given his strength, if he wanted to hide himself, we would probably find it very hard to keep track of him," the Golden Guard hesitantly said. After a few moments of silence, the first prince coldly snorted and then broke into a smile. "Relax. The capital is only so large. He'll have to come out at some point. And now that he's appeared, we're not the ones who need to worry about him. Has there been any movement from Li Junxian?" "They should already know of this matter," the Golden Guard sternly said. Wang Chong and Li Junxian were the representatives of their respective sides in the militarist Confucian conflict. One the advisor-in-waiting and the other the secretariat advisor, one pro-war and the other pro-peace. And while Wang Chong was gone, the Confucian sect had passed the proposal the king of foreign lands had so vehemently rejected, disbanding the prefectural armies. Even this Golden Guard had to admit that the Confucian sect had every reason to be worried. Keep watch on the Wang family at all times. In addition, Li Junxian, is he still not willing to cooperate?" the first prince suddenly asked. "We've already tried 3 times, but Li Junxian has found a reason to refuse us at every instance. The Confucian sect has obtained what it wanted and doesn't seem like it will be very cooperative now. But that man said that if your highness ascends the throne, Li Junxian and the Confucian sect will offer their full support." The first prince was initially taken aback, but then he sneered. "If I ascend the throne, will I still need their Confucian sect?" The first prince spat out, anger in his eyes. If Wang Chong were here, he would undoubtedly be stunned. He had only been gone from the capital for a little more than a month, but many things had happened. While the first prince and Confucian sect had completely seized the imperial court, it seemed like not everything was going according to plan. At the very least, the first prince and Li Junxian seemed to have had a falling out. Since that's the case, send a message to the secretariat advisor telling him that Wang Chong has returned," the first prince coldly ordered. "I'd like to see how he deals with it." Whoosh! A few moments later, a carrier pigeon took off from the palace and flew toward the secretariat advisor residence. Meanwhile, within the secretariat advisor residence located in the northwestern part of the capital, Li Junxian was seated cross-legged within a hall, wearing a white Confucian robe and a white band tied around his hair. He was surrounded by a circle of bronze lanterns. To the front and left side was a small mountain of bamboo tubes containing ancient texts. To the right were numerous books and documents of the imperial court. Li Junxian had his back straight and a thin brush in his hand as he wrote out a document for the imperial court on the desk in front of him. His confident writing style exuded a sense of exquisite beauty. Tap, tap, tap. Suddenly, a flurry of footsteps shattered the silence. Li Junxian lightly creased his brow. Raising his head, he saw a Confucian sect disciple rapidly approaching, a worried look on his face. "What's wrong?" Li Junxian asked. After a single glance, he turned his head back down to his work. "Young master, it's bad. The advisor-in-waiting suddenly returned to the capital last night. This information is 100% confirmed." Buzz! Li Junxian's brush froze in the air. "I see." Li Junxian quickly returned to his writing. The Confucian sect disciple was struck dumb by Li Junxian's abnormal calm. "Young master, this is bad news. That man represents the militarists in the court, and we disbanded the prefectural armies while he was gone. Now that he's back, he won't just let the matter drop." The voice of Elder Song came from behind Li Junxian and resounded through the hall. "That's right. Given that man's temper, he'll incessantly attempt to ruin the plans of young master and the Confucian sect." The white-clothed girl standing next to Elder Song agreed. The mention of Wang Chong's name had caused the expressions of Elder Song and the white-clothed girl to darken and fear to appear in their eyes. As members of the Confucian sect, an organization that had persisted for more than 1,000 years, they had little respect for the generals of the court, but Wang Chong was an exception. His might makes right had left the Confucian sect badly battered, and they had even been forced to use the influence of Master Zhu to finally suppress the matter. This had been the only time where the entire force of the Confucian sect had to be mobilized against one person, and every person in the Confucian sect knew his name. This was why that Confucian sect disciple had been so worried and anxious upon receiving the news. Tap. Li Junxian finished off his last word and finally raised his head, placing the brush on its rack. Elder Song, junior sister, there's an appropriate measure for every situation. Moreover, the matter is settled. Even though he's returned to the capital, he won't be able to stir many waves. Li Junxian's eyes were calm and his expression composed. Moreover, that incident has now passed and might makes right has been banned throughout the empire. Even if Wang Chong was the most brilliant general in the 300-year history of the Great Tang, he was still just one man. And in that crucial 1 month, they had finished everything they needed to do. Not even the king of foreign lands could do anything now. Everyone nodded in agreement. But just when they thought that their young master was not concerned about Wang Chong, Li Junxian spoke again. However, those subordinates of the king of foreign lands have been anticipating his return all this time, as have many people within the court. It's fine if he's learned his lesson from last time, but if he makes any strange move, we no longer need to be polite with the Wang clan. Li Qing, pass on my order. Keep a strict watch on the Wang clan's every move, particularly the king of foreign lands. Inform me the moment he makes any movement. Li Junxian firmly ordered the Confucian sect disciple. Everyone was slightly surprised by Li Junxian's order. Although their young master seemed calm, he clearly was not as indifferent about the incident from before as he appeared. Young master still feels threatened by that man. Young master's path has been smooth ever since he was a child, and he was hailed as a heaven-sent genius by the old sect master. But this time, young master has run into a real foe. Elder Song inwardly mused. Why had the heavens produced both a Zhou Yu and a Zhuge Liang? His young master and that other youth seemed to naturally reject each other. They were both too strong and too talented for the heavens to contain them both at the same time. No matter what, I have to think of a way to help young master and kill that Wang Chong, Elder Song decided. In the middle of his musings, a familiar figure rushed into the hall. Young master, the first prince has sent another message. This is the 4th time this month. Sword Ghost began talking the moment he came in. Buzz. The hall fell quiet once more. Elder Song, the white-clothed girl, Li Junxian, and even the Confucian sect disciple, Li Qing, all grimaced. Senior brother, are we really not going to go with him on this? The white-clothed girl hesitantly said, her expression tinged with fear. He's the first prince, the heir apparent. If we offend him, then... The first prince possessed extraordinary status, and if they didn't support him, the Confucian sect would have little hope of advancing its dreams. To refuse him at a time like this was extremely unwise. Everyone fell silent at these words. They naturally understood her reasoning, but what they were being asked to do... Junior sister. Li Junxian slowly stood up from his table. The Confucian sect has its rules, and the sect masters of each generation have always forbidden intervening in the war of the princes. This is how the Confucian sect has always conducted itself. Only by not meddling with imperial authority can we obtain authority that surpasses it. For the Confucian sect to always be able to swiftly develop a connection with the new sovereign when governments shift and obtain their assistance requires this. The first prince truly has assisted us, and he is the heir apparent. And all will be well if he succeeds, but if he fails, the Confucian sect will probably end with him. Thus, we cannot agree to the first prince's request no matter what, Li Junxian sternly said. We cannot cast aside the rules of the sect. This matter is not to be mentioned again, Elder Song declared. The white-clothed girl knew that she had said the wrong thing and hastily lowered her head. Senior brother, Elder, this was my mistake. I will never mention this again. The girl softly whispered. Young master, how should we reply to the first prince? Sword Ghost once more brought back everyone's focus. Li Junxian raised his head and firmly declared, draft a reply for me with the same response. If the first prince ascends the throne, our Confucian sect will give our full support. The news of Wang Chong's return had not caused a great stir, but through certain methods, It was quickly transmitted to those people who wanted to keep an eye on the Wang clan. In Hu Harp Street, Peepa Alley, only several blocks away from where Wang Chong had met Big Golden Tooth One, a Hu wrapped in a thick robe was rapidly making his way through the crowd. The Hu around him were ceaselessly chattering, and there were far more than there had ever been before. Although Hu Harp Street was home to a significant number of Hu, they usually didn't even reach 20% of the crowd. But now, the crowd almost entirely consisted of Hu. The man rushed into the depths of the alley. Stopping in front of an exotically designed door, he loudly knocked. Dock dock dock. A slat was opened on the gold-painted door, allowing an eye to peep out. After a glance, another Hu let the man inside. "My lord, we just received word that Wang Chong has returned to the capital. However, we still don't know where he is right now." The Hu bowed the moment he entered the room. This room was completely pitch black, and it felt like the Hu was talking to himself. But soon after, a light began to shine. Not far from the Hu was a curtain, and behind the curtain was an imposing silhouette. The imposing figure's right arm was extended, their hand open to reveal a luminous pearl the size of a chicken egg. It was this pearl that was lighting the room. "There is no activity from the Wang clan?" A hoarse voice spoke in the Hu tongue, soft and drifting, giving off an extremely strange feeling. "No, but, my lord, the king of foreign lands has always been hostile toward us Hu, and he's always been firmly in the pro-war faction, constantly calling for armies to attack the Hu. His return bodes ill for us." The Hu scout was clearly very afraid of the king of foreign lands. After the Southwest and Talas, Wang Chong had killed more than 1 million Hu, becoming their worst nightmare. In certain Hu countries, the mention of great general of the Central Plains Wang Chong would cause children to start wailing in the night. "Heh, his return is fine too." A strange laugh came from behind the curtain. "Now that he's back, we finally begin to stir the waters and throw the Great Tang into complete disarray. There's no need for us to worry about him, as we have many more problems to concern ourselves with. Let the Confucian sect handle him. Now, how is our plan proceeding?" the man behind the curtain asked. The Hu scout lowered his head. "My lord, we've started preparations. In the capital, we have 50,000 soldiers and about 3,000 stores. With this cover, we've been able to gather a large amount of intelligence, much of which we have sent to various countries," he said, a tone of extreme respect in his voice. "Humph, good. Let us just sit back and watch the Great Tang. We can just reap the benefits as the king of foreign lands once more shifts the political scene of the Great Tang. Just thinking about it makes one excited." The man gave an owlish laugh that slowly faded away. Finally, even the light of the pearl vanished, and the entire room was cast into darkness. As time slowly passed, more and more people came to know that Wang Chong had returned to the capital. A strange mood had settled in, and countless people were wondering what Wang Chong's next move in the militarist Confucian conflict would be. Vermilion Bird Street was packed with carriages. The common people and merchants cared little about the political climate. As long as the Great Tang didn't collapse, their lives wouldn't change very much. Safe, prosperous, healthy. At this time, the capital's star-plucking pavilion was welcoming a special guest. This man was wearing a bamboo hat from which a black veil hung down, concealing his face. A sword more than 4 feet long hung from his waist, clearly displaying the man's prestige and wealth. The man had to lower his head slightly to get past the door, and then he took the stairs all the way to a refined and secluded room on the 3rd floor. Entering, as the man stepped in, a voice called out, "You're here. Lord Marquis has been waiting a long time." The man flicked away his bamboo hat, which accurately drifted onto a nearby chair. The face beneath the hat was tough and hardened, determined and dignified. This was a general who had been through the bloody battlefield, but he also possessed a nobility and grace other generals lacked. This was none other than Imperial Army Commander Zhao Fengqian. "It's just a meeting. Is there any need to dress up like that?" The man seated on the chair turned around. It was none other than Wang Chong. It had been many months since the Battle of Talas. As Zhao Fengqian was a member of the Imperial Army, he had been called back to the palace, but even though they hadn't met in a few months, they still maintained their friendly relationship. There's nothing to be done. Everyone in the palace is afraid of their own shadows, worried that they could get pulled into the war of the princes. Zhao Fengqian bitterly smiled as he seated himself across from Wang Chong. So, you've also heard of what happened to the fifth prince? Wang Chong asked. He had arranged for a meeting with Zhao Fengqian precisely to ask about Li Heng's matter. Although he had sent some martial artists to protect Li Heng, this was a plan that only treated the symptoms. If he didn't find out the true sources of the assassins, he would just tire himself out, and it wouldn't matter how many experts he sent to protect Li Heng. Zhao Fengqian nodded, his face turning solemn. Not many people in the palace know about this, and it seems like the first prince is trying to suppress it, but an attempt on a prince's life within the palace is no trifling matter. Moreover, many of my brothers from the imperial army are moving around the imperial palace, so this matter has not been kept as much of a secret as one might imagine. You're a commander of the imperial army, responsible for keeping the imperial palace safe. Have you found no clue as to those assassins' origins? Wang Chong said. The matter isn't that simple. The first prince knows of my relationship to you, so before the incident, I was transferred from my original duty area. The fifth prince's palace is the responsibility of another commander. The imperial palace is very strict on matters like this, and we're to strictly keep to our assigned areas. Not even I can recklessly enter the patrol areas of other commanders. Moreover, even though this matter has been kept secret, anyone with eyes can see that it's related to the War of the Princes. The higher ranks of the imperial army have all taken fright and don't dare interfere. Zhao Fengqian sternly said. The War of the Princes was fraught with dangers. It wasn't just the great clans, but even the commanders of the imperial army who feared being drawn in. After all, these commanders of the imperial army didn't have just themselves to look out for. Wang Chong said nothing, only frowned. The situation was more complicated than he had imagined. Wang Chong tapped on the table and suddenly asked, What has your Zhao clan said? Buzz. Zhao Fengqian shuddered at these words like he had been stabbed by a needle. As expected, I can't hide anything from you. The clan has already told me to keep my distance from this matter and try not to interfere. They fear the War of the Princes more than anyone else. The Zhao clan was an extremely old clan that had seen numerous factional disputes, so it well understood how cruel the War of the Princes could be. For some people, this might be a chance to make their name in a single leap, but for great clans like the Zhao clan, all wars of the princes were like primordial beasts that needed to be kept as far away from as possible. But the clan is the clan and I am me. Assassins traversing through the palace and even attempting to take a prince's life without repercussion is a disgrace on the name of the imperial army. So there's no need for you to worry about me, Zhao Fengqian remarked, seemingly knowing what Wang Chong was concerned about. Zhao Fengqian had changed after experiencing Talas and Karasin, and his personality had become much more composed. In addition, if you want to investigate those people who tried to assassinate the fifth prince, I know a few people in the palace. They have always admired your highness for your righteous ways, and with their help, it should be much easier to find the truth, Zhao Fengqian said. Oh. Wang Chong nodded, his eyes flashing. Zhao Fengqian was still the same Zhao Fengqian. Whether in this life or the last, he was always of firm and unyielding mind. This was also why he had wanted to get close to Zhao Fengqian and forged a Wuxia steel sword for him. I also have a few people to investigate this matter. In a few days, think of a way to get them into the palace as soldiers of the imperial army. They might be of great assistance to you. Zhao Fengqian's eyes flashed in surprise, but he quickly nodded. After receiving a token from Wang Chong and conferring for a little longer, Zhao Fengqian left. There are many new faces in the imperial army. What is the first prince up to? Wang Chong thoughtfully raised his head. Zhao Fengqian had given him an important piece of news before leaving. It had been a long time since the imperial army garrisoned in the imperial palace had been touched, but it was now frequently being reshuffled, with many new faces appearing in the various divisions. And some of the officers had been switched out for people that Zhao Fengqian had never seen before. Zhao Fengqian said that he had almost been replaced himself. However, his achievements at Talas and the accolades of the Sage Emperor had ultimately caused those attempts to fail. This had some part to play in the apprehension felt by those in the palace. I really hope it's not that. With this thought flitting through his mind, Wang Chong left as well. As the temperature cooled, Wang Chong emerged in a secluded part of the restaurant, boarded his carriage, and set off. Within the carriage, Wang Chong continued to think. The imperial palace had his uncle-in-law and Zhao Fengqian, so the fifth prince would be safe for now. Wang Chong turned his head and said, "Old Eagle, send these 2 letters. In a few days, several people will arrive at the capital. They will have rather strange temperaments, remember that. Just make sure to take care of them and don't ask them any questions." "Yes, young master." Old Eagle quickly entered the compartment, took the letters, and then withdrew. Wang Chong had gotten to know many martial artists on his Northwest adventure, and 2 of them were a couple known as Heaven Deaf and Earth Mute. They didn't possess formidable martial arts but were skilled in pursuit. When they hunted someone down, they would rarely fail. They were the martial artists that Wang Chong wanted to use this time. When they had parted in the Northwest, the 2 had told Wang Chong that they would travel through seas of fire and over mountains of blades for him. No matter how formidable and cautious that group attempting to assassinate the 5th prince was, it had to have left behind some clues. Heaven Deaf and Earth Mute would definitely be able to find these clues. Such was Wang Chong's plan. Even though he was a noble of the Great Tang, he was also able to mobilize the martial artists of the righteous and evil paths, an honor that belonged to him alone. Wang Chong quickly calmed himself down, and with a thought, a golden seed appeared in his hand. Wang Chong had gone through many things in his excursion to the Northwest, and he needed to slowly digest them all. Of these things, the golden seed the origin immortal lord had given him had left him the most confused. Just what is this thing? Wang Chong muttered to himself as he looked at the seed. The golden lights the seed shone onto his face were constantly shifting. There had been a lot of time to think on his way from the Northwest back to the capital, but besides the boundless energy sealed within, he couldn't see anything else in the seed. He still did not understand how this seed was connected to the fate of the world. The origin immortal lord had waited 1,000 years, even setting up the origin immortal sect and setting up so many mechanisms and traps, precisely so that he could pass on this object of utmost importance to him. But Wang Chong was incapable of seeing through its secrets. Moreover, the Stone of Destiny had said that it was analyzing the seed's composition and secrets, but it had been 10-some days now, and there was still no result. There had never been such a long analysis before. It seemed like Wang Chong could do nothing but wait. And what would the Stone of Destiny produce in its final analysis? Or perhaps, the analysis had failed? Bang! In the middle of his ponderings, brash laughter and chattering in the Hu language came from outside, drawing Wang Chong's attention away. Raising the curtain, Wang Chong saw that a large number of Hu had gathered nearby and were jeering at a nearby young Han man. These Hu were wearing various styles of clothes. At a glance, Wang Chong could see Tibetan, Turkic, Mengshizhao, and even Western regioner clothes. Wang Chong could see that the young Han was red in the face from anger. He was apparently ready to go up and fight, but his friend pulled him back. "Forget it. They've only just arrived in the capital. Don't waste time with them. And they have more people than us. If a fight starts, we might not be able to beat them. Ha ha ha. Hear that? Our countries are all friends with the Great Tang, friends. Understand. Don't forget. It was your Great Tang that invited us. It's not like we wanted to come." A Hu spoke in rough Tang language and derisively pointed at the 2 young Han men. Bang! The clearly intoxicated Hu began to loudly laugh, their expressions brash and arrogant. Kaklak. The young Han man said nothing, but his fists were clenched in rage. "Wuluyalu?" Someone shouted out of the Hu crowd, and those who had been seated on the ground suddenly stood up and rushed to surround the 2 Han men. "Husubululu?" The Hu now had vicious looks in their eyes. They were clearly about to beat the 2 men up. Wang Chong instantly paled at this sight. "Old Eagle!" Wang Chong shouted. A moment later, Old Eagle descended upon the crowd like a giant bird with unfurled wings, the winds howling around him. As he snatched out with claw-like fingers, stellar energy erupted out, and then the 10-some who were snatched up by the neck and began to struggle in the air. These who were stricken with fear and began to shout in panic. They could deal with 2 ordinary Han men, but they were helpless in front of an expert like Old Eagle. Wang Chong had ordered Old Eagle to remain in the capital to handle the intelligence network, and it was precisely for this reason that Old Eagle had the time to cultivate the martial arts Wang Chong had given him, refining his stellar energy to a formidable level. Seeking death, Old Eagle stood in the center of the crowd, his eyes coldly flashing. Boom! 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 10 some who were sent flying outward like ragdolls. Bastard! Run! Come on! The Who saw the godlike Old Eagle and took fright. Before Old Eagle could attack again, they hastily got to their feet and scattered. Old Eagle did not pursue, and his actions had been greatly restrained. Although these who had been going too far, they had not killed anyone, so Old Eagle also had no reason to kill them. Sir, thank you for saving us. The 2 young Han men immediately came forward and voiced their thanks. Old Eagle, bring those 2 over. Old Eagle heard Wang Chong's voice at his ear. Young sirs, my master would like to see you, Old Eagle said to the 2. The 2 glanced at each other in surprise, but they still followed Old Eagle into the carriage. Wang Chong had slightly altered his face, so the pair did not immediately recognize him. Wang Chong skipped the pleasantries and went straight to the main topic. What happened between you and those who? Why were they targeting you? The 2 of them glanced at each other, the youth on the left slightly reddening. Though a little apprehensive, they decided to explain the whole story. It's not something nice to talk about, but since young master has already seen it, I won't hide anything. The young man tightly clenched his fists, and after a few moments of silence, he began to explain. A few days ago, my fiancée passed by this place on the way to buy some cosmetics, but she ended up running into these who. They showered her with obscenities and even groped her. She was so humiliated that she almost committed suicide. The young man's words immediately caused Wang Chong to raise an eyebrow in surprise. I was out at the time, so I didn't know the whole story. I came this time to ask for an explanation, but to my surprise, these people admitted to the deed and showed no shame whatsoever. In fact, they even wanted to beat us up. The young man gnashed his teeth, his entire body trembling in rage. It was clear that he felt immensely humiliated over his inability to take revenge for his fiancée's humiliation. If not for Wang Chong's help, they would have probably been beaten black and blue. Within the carriage, Wang Chong's brows locked together. Although he hadn't seen the quarrel between this pair and the Who, he had never imagined that this would be the story. What's going on? Shouldn't this matter be under the purview of the city guard? Why haven't they intervened yet? Wang Chong coldly said. The capital had its laws, and its various areas were all under the administration of the city guard. A large crowd causing a disturbance was simply impossible in normal circumstances, which was why Wang Chong had been rather surprised to see a crowd of intoxicated Who in the middle of the street. It's useless. The city guard has no jurisdiction over this matter. I went to the city guard earlier and they said that the Who in the capital were the responsibility of the Secretariat Advisor residents, and they had no authority over them, the young man said in indignation. Buzz! Wang Chong's expression sank when he heard the Secretariat Advisor residents, and the carriage instantly fell into silence. The young man's friend suddenly spoke, a sense of helplessness in his voice. Everyone is saying that now that the Great Tang and all the other countries have disbanded their armies and are peacefully coexisting, the situation is wonderful like never before in history, and the Great Tang has a chance of truly reaching peace with everyone else. They say that war won't exist in the future and the world will be in harmony. The Imperial Court has also said again and again that the Who have only recently arrived and don't understand the customs of the Central Plains very well, and it hopes that we can tolerate them and teach them. This is so that we can all avoid any campaigns or wars in the future. This is why I've always advised him to just let these matters go. At the time, everyone talked about how great it would be for the world to be in harmony and said that there would never be any more fighting between countries. But who could have expected things to turn out like this? I now think about that book written by the King of Foreign Lands, Might Makes Right. Perhaps it wasn't entirely unreasonable. The friend sighed. His offhand, melancholy comment caused a subtle shift in the mood. Old Eagle raised his head and instinctively shot a glance at his young master. His young master had sweat blood and tears to write 2 books, Might Makes Right and Doctrine of War. In the end, Li Junxian joined together with Master Zhu and had them both banned, but it now seemed like those books were still having an effect. The pair quickly clasped their hands in gratitude and left. Old Eagle, what's the current situation in the capital? How many incidents like theirs are taking place? Wang Chong looked at Old Eagle. Old Eagle was living in the capital and responsible for handling all the spies and scouts. Wang Chong was sure that he knew about these incidents that were taking place in broad daylight. Old Eagle froze. He hadn't expected Wang Chong to ask about this. With the Secretariat Advisor and Li Linfu in control of the court, the Great Tang has thrown open its gates and allowed large numbers of Hu into the capital. There are many more Hu in the capital than at any time previous, and crowds of Hu can be seen on every street. So that they can settle down, Li Junxian has given them many privileges. They can buy storefronts in the capital so they can sell the specialties of their countries. But as more people come in, conflicts are inevitable, and for the sake of the overall situation, the Confucian sect has opted for a policy of excessive toleration. Old Eagle sternly said. Our subordinates have gathered many reports of this nature, but as these matters are inconsequential incidents of public safety for the city guard to worry about, we did not report them. Old Eagle lowered his head. He had always believed this matter to be of too little importance and that Wang Chong's attention was on the imperial court and Confucian sect. It was now obvious that this was not the case. Since Wang Chong had asked about it, he clearly cared about it. In other words, Old Eagle had failed at his duty. I understand. Once we return, give me a full report on the matter. In addition, you must report all similar incidents to me in the future. Wang Chong sternly said. Yes. Old Eagle lowered his head even further. The carriage slowly moved forward, and Wang Chong began to see more and more Hu in the crowd. The majority of the Han kept their distance, not daring to speak up. As the carriage continued, he even saw places where the signboards with gold-painted Han words had been replaced with signs in Hu. Looking around, he saw that the most obvious spots were almost all occupied by Hu stores while the Tang merchants occupied the more out-of-the-way locations. The merchants of these stores glared furiously at the smug faces of the Hu merchants. Wang Chong also saw several Hu running out of a store. These people had taken items from a store and had refused to pay. Not only that, they had harangued the store owner while talking about how the Great Tang was at peace with all the foreign countries and they all belonged to the same people. He even saw some Hu beating up a Han, but nobody cared about it. The city guard passed by while keeping their distance, rage and helplessness in their eyes. Wang Chong's brows furrowed, and his expression darkened. He had only been gone for a little more than a month, but so many things had happened in the capital. So much had changed. After his meeting with Zhao Fengqin, Wang Chong had just chosen a street at random, but he could see Hu acting out with extreme brashness and arrogance. One could only imagine how many similar incidents were taking place throughout the capital. The capital of the Great Tang was a critical area guarded by many soldiers, and it was still in such a state. The situation elsewhere in the empire was probably even worse. Wang Chong had believed that Li Junxian only had a difference of ideals. He had never expected him to be this much of a buffoon. A dam of 1,000 li could be collapsed by a single ant hole. Perhaps he believed that since the concept of the harmonious world and peace with the surrounding countries was at its peak popularity, he couldn't treat the Hu entering the capital too harshly for fear of ruining his plans, but he was scarcely realizing that even though he was just sacrificing a few people, he was destroying the will of the people. As an agricultural society, the Great Tang was only able to proactively expand and defeat its foes again and again because the entire country was united from top to bottom. This place was the capital of the empire, the heart of the Central Plains, but the Hu were still able to act so recklessly and arrogantly. The city guard who should have been protecting the people of the capital were helpless, and this could only have a chilling effect on the rest of the Great Tang's subjects. If the will of the people crumbled and the empire lost its unity, the empire's foundation would be washed away. Wang Chong could not permit this. Wang Chong sat like a statue within the carriage, But Old Eagle knew that the more Wang Chong was like this, the more furious and uneasy he was. Wang Chong suddenly opened his eyes and ordered, "Old Eagle, turn the carriage around. Take me to the Bureau of Military Personnel." In those bright eyes, Old Eagle could clearly see a sliver of cold and severe light. Wang Chong spent an entire night in the Bureau of Military Personnel, only emerging to go home at daybreak. Several days later, explosive news shook the capital. Under the leadership of the Bureau of Military Personnel, a public order office had been established, and the one who had established it was the man who had been missing for a little more than a month, the king of foreign lands. Clop clop, a group of brightly armored cavalry rode down the most prosperous street in the eastern part of the capital, Azure Dragon Street. This cavalry group wore bright red armor different from any other force of cavalry, and two words could be seen emblazoned on the front and back. Public order. What's this? What strange soldiers? I've never seen them before. What have they come here for? Public order? When did the capital ever have an army like this? The crowd immediately noticed this new group of soldiers and found it very curious and interesting. But these cavalry ignored the looks of the crowd. Maintaining their orderly ranks, they exuded an extremely high level of discipline and training. At the front of the group was an officer of 20-some years of age. His eyes were seething with killing intent as they scanned the dense crowds of Azure Dragon Street like a patrolling hawk. Hiya! While the surrounding crowd was still in a daze, a thunderous roar exploded through the air. A moment later, the young officer had locked onto a certain place and charged forward with his men. Seize them all! The crowd fell into disarray as everyone watched those horsemen charge forward with savage expressions at a group of intoxicated who were cursing at bystanders and smashing up the wares of a Tang merchant. Thump thump thump. Before the who could react, 20-some horsemen had dismounted and charged at them. Crack crack. The cracking of joints could be heard as the horsemen seized the critical joints of the drunken who and swiftly subdued them. What are you doing? We're guests to the capital of the Great Tang. Your Great Tang was the one who invited us. Is this how you treat guests? Release me. Release me right now. You've got the wrong person. Those intoxicated who immediately began to loudly shout. Humph. Be a little more obedient. The young officer simply seized one of the protesting who and held him up in the air, a look of disgust in his eyes. Let me tell you, I didn't get the wrong person. I came precisely for you lot. Come. Take them all away. The cavalry had the who tied up on their horses with swift efficiency. Release me. Release me. You don't have the authority to arrest us. Even your Secretariat advisor has said that the city guard has no power over us. You're destroying the peace between countries. Seeing that the cavalry were being sincere, the who finally began to panic and sober up, their bodies beginning to wriggle around. After spending so much time in the capital, they basically ate and drank whatever they wanted, never worrying about paying. But these Tang horsemen seemed serious. I'm reporting you. I'll definitely report you. The who began to shout in rough Han. Report whatever you want. I might as well mention that we're not part of the city guard. All of us belong to the public order office. The officer coldly snorted. After saying this, he tied up the last who, and the group swiftly rode away. Bang! Not long after they were gone, the crowd on Azure Dragon Street finally realized what had happened and exploded into cheers. Good! Those bastards were finally taken away. I was sick of seeing them around. What harmonious world! Those guys were nothing but rats and bugs. The crowd voiced their praises. These who had gathered together recently and had occupied the area for themselves. But the city guard had chosen to ignore them. They had been forced to swallow their anger. But finally, someone had finally vented their anger for them. But who were those people? A commoner muttered. He had lived in the capital for decades, but he had never heard of any public order office. Seize them all. Similar incidents took place in all other parts of the capital. Groups of cavalry wearing red armor charged into the places where the who gathered. Any who that committed a crime, whether it was robbery, harassing women, or beating up others, was arrested. What? The news was soon sent to the hidden room within Peepa Alley. The man behind the curtain suddenly stood up. Our men have been arrested by the Public Order Office? Even through the curtain, the man's shock was clearly communicated through his voice. Yes, they've arrested more than 3,000 of our men, with more than 50% of the people on Wuxia Street being arrested. We thought that if everyone was committing the crimes, the law couldn't punish everyone, so they would at most only arrest 20-some people. But to our surprise, they've captured more than 3,000 and show no signs of stopping. Everyone feels in danger and have decided to shut themselves in their rooms and see how the situation develops. And it seems like the Public Order Office has strengthened its patrols and has even expanded its reach to the edges of the capital. The who had delivered the news had a worried look on his face. The situation had developed too quickly. It felt like they had been discussing the king of foreign lands only a second ago, and a moment later, the man himself had given all the who in the capital a most unpleasant surprise. Many Tibetans, Turks, Gogurians, and people of the other countries have been captured, as have many of our spies. This situation does not bode well for us, the scout said. The man behind the curtain couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. Even though that noble had been forced out of the imperial court and had been gone for a month, when he reappeared, he still made all the who feel like they had a dagger against their backs. If not for the orders from above, he would have never taken his mission and gone to provoke that god of slaughter. A deathly and oppressive stillness gripped the room. The man behind the curtain said nothing, but even this who spy could sense how grave his mood was. But a few moments later, the man spoke once more. Don't panic. Everything is still under our control. The king of foreign lands has killed so many of our people that it's high time he paid a little price. This is the capital, not the battlefield, and it's not some place he can mess around. Pass on my order. In the name of the great minister, gather together the various emissaries and submit a joint memorial to the court. Let's see what Li Junxian and the first prince have to say about this. Even if we can't deal with him, there are naturally people that can. I'd like to see what explanation they come up with, the man viciously said. The mention of the great minister had the who spy trembling, a hint of respect appearing on his face. The great minister the man referred to was naturally the imperial minister of the Yusang Empire, Dalen Trinling. The collaboration between Yusang and all the other countries was almost entirely under the guidance of the imperial minister, and the man behind the curtain was one of his disciples. Everyone else had been caught off guard by Wang Chong's sudden movements in the capital, but he had remained composed, and he had also been able to very quickly think about using the first prince and Li Junxian, something that few of his peers could match. This subordinate will deliver this order. The Hu spy became much calmer now that he had clear orders to deliver. The establishment of the Public Order Office had not only shocked the secret room in Pipa Alley. More than 3,000 who had been arrested, and the entire capital trembled. And this incident's association with Wang Chong's name sent another massive tremor through the capital. While the great clans of the Great Tang produced innumerable brilliant descendants, none of them could compare to Wang Chong. Even though Wang Chong had eventually been defeated in the militarist Confucian conflict, he had been the only one capable of shaking the world with 2 books, even alarming Master Zhu. After disappearing for more than a month, he had suddenly established the Public Order Office. Although people still weren't sure what this was, everyone knew that the situation in the capital had changed, because he had finally returned. Storms were brewing all across the capital. Bang! As the Public Order Office was beginning its mass arrests, the gate of the Secretariat Advisor residence slammed open, and an urgent message was delivered to Li Junxian. Wang Chong, you're forcing my hand. Within the hall, Li Junxian only glanced at the letter before crumpling it into a ball. His young and handsome face was twisted in rage. Li Junxian rarely lost his composure, but Wang Chong had truly provoked him this time. He had reached the end of his tolerance for Wang Chong. In his quarrel with Wang Chong, he had almost always tried to focus on their difference in ideals instead of attacking the person himself, even trying to persuade Wang Chong several times after he was called back from Khorasan. Li Junxian had always attempted to maintain the path of the gentleman and made his arguments through reason, not force. Even when Wang Chong was gone for more than a month, he had not taken the opportunity to directly attack the Wang clan. But Wang Chong's actions had once more forced him into a corner. The peace agreements between the Great Tang and all the other countries were firmly in place, with the armies disbanded and withdrawn. He had even disbanded the prefectural armies. It was now settled that the Great Tang would turn its swords into plowshares. Li Junxian had believed that no matter how unwilling Wang Chong was, he would no longer stir up any waves. But after just a few days, he had gone and made this public order office. There were many more who in the capital than before, and these who could even manage 1 or 2 sentences of Tang language and wore the clothes of the Central Plains. This was basically unheard of in the past. But now that Wang Chong was arresting so many people, the foreigners would no longer be willing to enter the capital. Not only that, the Great Tang and all the other countries had only managed to reach this stage with great difficulty, with millions of soldiers being disarmed. However, Wang Chong had now arrested more than 3,000 people, which would undoubtedly cause the other countries to believe that the Great Tang was not worth trusting. It was just a tiny public order office, but it was enough for everything the Confucian sect had worked for, all their patience and sacrifice, all that they cherished, to be made into nothing. "Young master, what do we do now?" Elder Song, the white-clothed girl, Sword Ghost, and the powerful experts of the Confucian sect all stared at Li Junxian. The oppressive air crackled with their flames of rage. They were just as infuriated as Li Junxian. The harmonious world was their dream. From the moment they entered the Confucian sect, they had agreed to offer up their lives to realize this dream, and they could not permit anyone to profane it. "Prepare my court robes. I'm going to see the first prince." Li Junxian's eyes flashed as he made up his mind, and he stood up and strode out of the hall. How audacious! There was someone who was even angrier than Li Junxian at this time. In the eastern palace of the inner court, a furious voice resounded off the walls. Boom! A large palm slammed down and instantly pulverized a golden armrest. Without this prince's order, they dared to set up this public order office and place it beyond the authority of the imperial court. Are they planning a rebellion? No court session had been held and the memorial for the public order office had not been presented. But the first prince had been keeping a close watch on Wang Chong, so he already knew about what he had been planning. The public order office was already going around arresting people before the imperial court had even passed the decree establishing it. Such impudence had the first prince utterly enraged. The Great Tang belonged to the subjects of the Great Tang, but more than that, it belonged to the House of Li, and the Great Tang of the House of Li was the first prince's Great Tang. As the first prince, he was the right and proper crown prince, and also the right and proper next sage emperor. All authority should have stemmed from the imperial court, and thus stemmed from him. For this reason, the first prince found the matter of the public order office even more intolerable than Li Junxian. To set up another imperial court is a great taboo. At this moment, a sharp and high-pitched voice resounded through the eastern palace. The white-haired eunuch at the first prince's side slowly spoke. Your Highness, although Wang Chong was the one who gave the order, the soldiers of the public order squads were provided by the Bureau of Military Personnel. In other words, this was Xianxia Jianxiong's order. If your Highness wishes to punish Wang Chong, it will not be easy. Xianxia Jianxiong, The first prince's expression turned cold, his eyes gleaming. In the last militarist Confucian conflict, I didn't make trouble for him. Does he really think that Consort Taizhen's protection means that I can't do anything to him? Pass on my order to gather the officials for a meeting. In addition, take this prince's token and take a trip to the Minister of War residence. I would like to ask Xianxia Jianxiong what he means by establishing this public order office. What sort of head does he have on his shoulders that he dares to establish such an office without a decree from this prince and the imperial court? The first prince coldly said, his eyes seething with killing intent. This old slave will deliver the order. The skies over the capital were dark and an undercurrent flowed beneath the surface. Countless messenger birds flew here and there as innumerable spies moved throughout the capital to gather information on the new public order office. But the Minister of War residence was the nexus of all this information. The initial members of the public order squad had originated from here, and it was true that King of Foreign Lands Wang Chong had paid a visit to Xianxia Jianxiong before this. Wang Chong, you've put me on the roasting rack. Within the Minister of War residence, Xianxia Jianxiong bitterly smiled at his guest. A pot made of gold-colored ceramic had been placed on the table, and within it was top-quality tea from Longjing. The tea was still piping hot, and the two exquisitely crafted cups next to the pot were brimming. The guest sitting on the other side of the table had a calm and composed expression as they drank cup after cup. Meanwhile, Xianxia Jianxiong had left his own cup idle for more than 5 minutes without even a sip. "Just treat it as me owing you a favor," Wang Chong softly chuckled. "Moreover, all the generals on the border are receiving promotions that are really demotions, and even Geshu Han's subordinates have been transferred to Lingnan to repair bridges and roads, let alone others. The authority of the generals has weakened to the extreme, and it will probably be the great generals who are next. You're the Minister of War and have lived more years than I have. If the Great Tang has no more great generals, your position as Minister of War probably won't last for very long either," Wang Chong indifferently said. "There's no need to talk like this. What favor? If you didn't help me in the War of the Southwest, I wouldn't be sitting here. Besides, the Confucian sect is constantly hounding us. My Bureau of Military Personnel still has enough authority to muster up some cavalry for your public order squads. But if you had waited a little longer, I wouldn't even be able to muster infantry." Xianxia Jianxiong sorrowfully sighed. He had already considered all the consequences that would come with setting up the public order office, but he had still chosen to help Wang Chong. This was partially driven by the fact that he really did owe Wang Chong a big favor for the Southwest, but it was also because the Minister of War was on the verge of becoming a figurehead. "The imperial court should be coming to find me soon, but given all my efforts over my 20 years in the Southwest, not even the first prince should be able to do much to me, even if he is the heir apparent." "But what do you plan to do?" Xianxia Jianxiong said. When Xianxia Jianxiong looked at that young and determined face, he was suddenly reminded of his younger self. When he was young, he once had the same courageous, determined, and decisive eyes. No matter what kind of setback he endured or opponent he faced, he would have never backed down. It was precisely this unyielding determination that had allowed him to reach his current point, the tiger of the empire, the conqueror of the Southwest. Once, he had dreamed about entering the capital, taking over the Bureau of Military Personnel, dominating the government, and then becoming prime minister just like Duke Zhou or Li Linfu. Now, after 20-some years, with many of his hairs having gone white, he had finally fulfilled his wish. He now served at the feet of the Son of Heaven and commanded all the soldiers of the realm. But after experiencing one political storm after another, he had gradually learned to be cautious and evasive, losing his original courage and determination. Without realizing it, he had gotten old. Xianxia Jianxiong couldn't help but sigh. Now, the young man sitting across from him had become the hope of all the protectorates on the border, all the officers and soldiers in the army, and even the Minister of War. If they wanted to oppose the Confucian sect and the first prince, who were at the height of their power, Wang Chong was their only chance. "There's a proper countermeasure for everything. I have my own ideas on how to deal with it." Wang Chong did not give any details. Xianxia Jianxiong gave a slight nod. He was never worried about Wang Chong. While young, Wang Chong had a long list of achievements and conquests, so there was no need for him to explain too much. Reporting. As the two were conversing, one of Xianxia Jianxiong's personal guards rushed inside. "Milord, a eunuch from the palace has come. He has the first prince's token and says that Milord has been requested to enter the palace for a court session." Wang Chong and Xianxia Jianxiong both widened their eyes and looked at the guard. "Lord Xianxia, His Highness has requested your presence. Please." A sharp voice came from outside. The voice came from very far away, but its owner moved like a ghost, and just a few moments later, he was stepping over the threshold without making a sound. Wang Chong and Xianxia Jianxiong were both top-class experts, particularly Wang Chong, who had received an enormous boost in strength after his Northwest adventure. But not even he was sure how this white-haired eunuch with claw-like hands had managed to get inside. The man quietly stood there with a confident bearing, but Wang Chong couldn't sense his aura. The man felt like an illusion. A thought suddenly occurred to him, and he profoundly gazed at the eunuch. However, he remained silent and simply took a sip of his tea. So it was Lord Eunuch. Forgive me for not coming out to greet you. Xianxia Jianxiong quickly got to his feet and bowed. He had spent some time in the palace and had seen the first prince's personal eunuch several times. So Lord Xianxia was with the king of foreign lands. It was rather rude for me to show up like this. Surprisingly, the eunuch ignored Xianxia Jianxiong and turned his eyes to the composed Wang Chong. Lord Eunuch knows of me? Wang Chong faintly smiled and looked up at the eunuch. The white-haired eunuch stared at Wang Chong and unhurriedly said, "The mighty name of the king of foreign lands is known throughout the land. The first king of a different surname, personally granted the title by his majesty. I accompany his highness in the palace, so how could I not have heard of this? Is that so?" Wang Chong merely smiled in reply. On the side, Xianxia Jianxiong couldn't help but pale. He had begun to sense that there was something strange going on between these two. The eunuch Yin before him was the first prince's closest advisor and eunuch official. He was responsible for handling all of the first prince's affairs and would only leave the palace for matters of utmost importance. Moreover, as the first prince's favorite, he had a cold and aloof personality. Xianxia Jianxiong had seen him several times, but he rarely ever spoke. The man valued his words like they were made of gold, barely exchanging words with even high nobles and important officials. Even Xianxia Jianxiong had only managed to get a few words from his lips. But now, Eunuch Yin was ignoring the master of this building and had started a conversation with Wang Chong, who had been minding his own business and drinking tea. This was incredibly abnormal. Seeing that the mood had turned strange, Xianxia Jianxiong laughed and changed the subject. "Haha, Lord Eunuch. Did His Highness not have a matter to discuss? Let us set off." These words proved effective. Eunuch Yin shot one last glance at Wang Chong before turning to Xianxia Jianxiong. "Lord Xianxia, please." Xianxia Jianxiong and Eunuch Yin quickly departed. Wang Chong stared in the direction they had left, his mind rapidly turning. Wang Chong had heard of Li Ying's personal eunuch, Eunuch Yin, in his last life, but only his name. For dynasty after dynasty, sovereigns would almost always prepare top-class experts to protect the highly regarded princes. It was very rare for there to be cases like Li Heng's, who was only assigned Li Jingzhong, who barely had the strength to truss a chicken. Of course, when it came to plots and conspiracies, this eunuch was more formidable than any other eunuch in history, which was why Li Heng had survived 5 attempts on his life so far. But someone as extraordinarily powerful as Eunuch Yin was also extremely rare. This was no longer a simple bodyguard. It was absolutely abnormal for a eunuch of the court to reach this level. And this person just had to be the first prince's personal eunuch. Countless thoughts ran through Wang Chong's mind. "It's enough. I should begin moving as well," Wang Chong softly said, and he quickly left the Minister of War residence. The establishment of the Public Order Office did not have the approval of the imperial court, and the first prince's rage was within Wang Chong's expectations. Moreover, the Public Order Office had been his idea, and he had merely used Xianxia Jianxiong to get it done formally. The first prince was planning to use Xianxia Jianxiong to display his might to Wang Chong, and without Wang Chong's assistance, Xianxia Jianxiong would find it very difficult to hold out against the court's cross-examination. Even if the circumstances weren't that severe, Wang Chong would not just sit back and watch. "Tell Old Eagle to prepare to move," Wang Chong ordered from within his carriage, and then the wheels began to roll, and he was off. As Wang Chong was leaving the Minister of War residence, within Pipa Alley, in front of the Golden Door, 5 or 6 men with intimidating faces and bright eyes were standing in a row, their backs bowed. "Has Milord still not come out?" A Hu with a pale face and rather sinister looks suddenly asked. They had come after receiving a summons, and had Tibetans, Turks, Mengshi and Arabs amongst them. The new public order squads were arresting people all over the capital, with the 3,000 now swelling to 5 or 6,000, and still increasing. All kinds of people had been arrested from all the various countries. Arabia, Karak Spazinu, Yusang, Mengshi, all the Hu were involved, and all of them were in a bad situation, so they needed to prevent the situation from getting worse. This was why they had all gathered here. As the group was chatting, a voice came from behind the door. "Are you ready?" It was neither loud nor soft, but it was imbued with dignity and a tone that instilled trust in others. Buzz. This voice carrying a Tibetan accent caused everyone to hastily lower their heads in respect. Quite a few people had attempted to challenge this man's authority and been killed, even those spy captains who had spent decades in the capital. Because all their countries were different, these spies had all been under the jurisdiction of different systems, so at the start, they had only reported to their own countries. The spies from the other countries had wanted to save a decisive battle with the Tibetans, but the final result took them by surprise. Not only did their respective countries not agree to their requests, they were stripped of their authority as captains and ordered to return, after which nothing else was heard of them. Afterward, letters of reprimand came from the various countries, telling the various spies in the capital to know their place and listen to the orders of the man behind the door. Creak. The door opened, and a Tibetan with a rather lean body walked out, escorted by several Tibetan warriors. This man had the red flush characteristic of the plateau, but it was not as obvious. Moreover, if one looked carefully, one would see that he had a high nose and deep-set eyes, making him seem more like a Turk. He was clearly someone who had both Tibetan and Turkic blood running in his veins. Has the great Tang court session begun? Machi Xiangyang scanned the group before him, his eyes twinkling with a crafty light. My lord, our people have been watching the palace gates and have already seen many important officials go in. Even Minister of War Xianxia Zhenxiong was summoned into the palace. The court session has undoubtedly begun. Good. Machi Xiangyang gave a knowing smile. According to custom, today should have been a day of rest for the officialdom, with no court session being held. The laws of the Great Tang Empire had decreed that there would be 1 or 2 days of rest each month, and the officials should be summoned only for special incidents. But it was obvious that the first prince was incredibly furious. The number one person provoked by the Public Order Office was none other than the heir apparent of the Great Tang. There was no need for any grand action on Machi Xiangyang's part, as the first prince would deal with the king of foreign lands for him. Since that's the case, let's add to the flames. Pass on my order. Tell everyone to prepare to move out. A vicious light gleamed in Machi Xiangyang's eyes. Yes. The others immediately dispersed to deliver the orders. Many old officials who had not participated in court sessions for a long time had been summoned. The first prince was far angrier over the Public Order Office than anyone had imagined. Xianxia Zhenxiong, you're quite bold. Without a decree from the Department of State Affairs, without a decree from the Imperial Court, you dared to set up the Public Order Office on your own. This prince asks you? Are you planning a rebellion? The first prince's enraged bellows bounced off the walls of Taiha Palace. Whether it was the first prince or any other prince, none of them could tolerate even the slightest infringement of imperial authority. Xianxia Zhenxiong, you're only the Minister of War, not the Prime Minister, and you're certainly not His Highness or the Sage Emperor. Who gave you the authority to set up a government office on your own? Your public order squads are not under the control of the Imperial Court. What is the meaning of this? Your Highness, this subject has a memorial. This subject impeaches Xianxia Zhenxiong for acting audaciously and recklessly without respect for the Imperial Court. This subject agrees. Your Highness, please heavily punish Xianxia Zhenxiong. This subject also agrees. The entire Imperial Court was brimming with anger as all the officials sent wave after wave of criticism. Even though Xianxia Zhenxiong had been through 20 years of campaigning and had mentally prepared himself, even he couldn't help but pale and break out in a cold sweat under this barrage of criticism. The Imperial Court almost entirely consisted of members belonging to the Confucian sect or King Qi, and Xianxia Zhenxiong was basically alone. Xianxia Zhenxiong thought that at least King Song would support him, but to his surprise, he didn't see any trace of him. It seemed like nobody had informed King Song, or perhaps the first prince didn't want King Song here. My lords, Xianxia meant nothing of the sort. This act was merely a way to deal with the who in the city and maintain the peace and safety of the capital. Xianxia would never harbor disloyal notions. Xianxia Zhenxiong barely managed to force out these words. Moreover, Xianxia Zhenxiong had originally believed that he only had to deal with the matter of the Public Order Office, but this matter had become much more complex. He was now being accused of plotting a rebellion. Since ancient times, anyone who tried to seize authority for themselves and plotted treason would never receive a good end. Although Xianxia Jianxiong was an old subject who had rendered great service, not even he could survive this sort of crime. You didn't mean that? The public order squads began to brazenly arrest people right from the start with the imperial court, including the first prince, knowing nothing about it. Just how much should we tolerate before you suddenly mean it? Will it only count once you lead the soldiers of the Bureau of Military Personnel in a rebellion against the capital? The civil officials in the hall took turns issuing attacks. Buzz. Xianxia Jianxiong paled. The Bureau of Military Personnel was the nexus of the realm's armies and had the special right to move around the armies of the provinces and protectorates. This was an extremely sensitive position, and this official clearly wanted to exploit this fact to push him into a dead end. Your Highness, the world itself can serve as witness to this old subject's loyalty to your Highness. In the past, this old subject followed the sage emperor on his conquests, going west to subjugate Yusang, and south to suppress Mengshi Zhao, covering his body in wounds. When His Majesty saw this old subject, he said that this old subject's loyalty toward the Great Tang went down to his bones and personally granted this old subject the title Tiger of the Empire, at the same decreeing that this old subject should preside over the southwest against foreign invaders. Xianxia Jianxiong's eyes went red as he declared, "If this old subject is truly disloyal, Your Highness only needs to tell the Sage Emperor. If the Sage Emperor gives the word, this old subject is willing to cut his throat in front of Taihe Palace and empty out all his blood to clear his name." Buzz. The officials who were endlessly criticizing Xianxia Jianxiong suddenly fell silent and still. Even First Prince Li Ying was taken aback and momentarily speechless. One could say that Xianxia Jianxiong was being overly audacious and reckless, but no one in the Great Tang would believe that he was actually disloyal. Although the first prince was furious, he had never even thought about pushing Xianxia Jianxiong to suicide. Humph! A cold snort broke the air of stalemate in the court. Xianxia Jianxiong, you set up the public order office of your own volition, and now you threaten to commit suicide. Are you saying that the first prince is wrong? These were damning words, and Xianxia Jianxiong instantly paled. As expected, the first prince once more exploded with rage. Xianxia Jianxiong, are you saying that I forced you into this? The first prince's anger was plainly written on his face. Reporting. A voice came from outside, and a few moments after that, the silk-robed attendant for the palace gates, responsible for delivering messages, rushed inside. Your Highness, the emissaries from the foreign countries have sent a letter fiercely opposing the wanton arrest of Hu by the Public Order Office. They wish to see the Great Tang release their subjects as quickly as possible. The emissaries have also said that even though their countries have signed peace accords with the Great Tang, the Great Tang's current wanton arrests of Hu has made them doubt the Great Tang's sincerity. Everyone in the hall grimaced at these words, and everyone began to glare at Xianxia Jianxiong, including the first prince. The peace between the Great Tang and all the other countries was unprecedented. Xianxia Jianxiong's public order squads had created far more trouble than expected. The Confucian sect officials in the hall wanted nothing more than to eat Xianxia Jianxiong alive. Right now, the Confucian sect was in the middle of talks with the various countries regarding increasing the number of schools in foreign lands. They were also attempting to persuade these countries to recruit more students to learn the Tang language, but now that something like this had occurred, how could they continue their negotiations? Trouble followed trouble, and just when the officials were thinking about how to placate the foreign emissaries, footsteps once more came from outside. Reporting. Your Highness, many who have appeared outside the palace gates, protesting the mass arrests performed by the Great Tang's public order squads. They say that they won't leave until those arrested have been released. More than 10,000 who have gathered at the palace gates, and even more people are gathering. It seems like all the Hu in the capital are coming. A general responsible for guarding the palace stopped at the doors to the hall and got down on one knee. Your Highness, please give your instructions. What? The first prince shot to his feet, his face twisting in rage. Below him, the gathered officials had exploded into an uproar.